history lesson there. Kind of fun. So what is air conditioning? Well, it's the process of maintaining comfort for the occupants by conditioning the air, and that could be temperature, humidity, uh, where the air is blowing. So that's the output. Do we want air on the windshield? Do we want air in our face? Do we want air on our feet? Um, and that would also have to do with cleanliness. So when we talk about cleanliness, if we're let's say driving in, I'm not going to put downtown LA on the spot, but I'm gonna tell you when I rolled through that neighborhood, it was a little rough over there. So let's just say it's a farm field, okay? That way nobody's offended by the smell. If you're going through a farm field and there's a bunch of cows, cows do stuff that cows do, and it smells bad, you should actually be able to condition that air by putting it on recirculate. And now your air is no longer going to pull from outside. It's going to recirculate your air. Regardless, it'll be going through the cabin air filter. And our cabin air filters can be impregnated with carbon, or it's a lot of times charcoal. They'll use charcoal to take away odors. Some of them will even use some sort of an ionizer to electrify full ions that would be odor. So we'll clean that air as well. It could be the other way. If let's say you have some sort of an issue inside the vehicle, like the cow thing, except it's one of your passengers, flatulence, you may say, we may actually want to put it on fresh air. So we could recirculate it, but if the recirculating air is already bad, put that baby on fresh air, get some fresh air, and then you can also put the windows down. It does help. It does help. So it's accompanied by adding or removing heat and humidity. So we can heat it, we could cool it. We could dry it. We generally don't add humidity. A lot of times we're really just trying to pull humidity out. The reason that's such a big deal is let's say it's raining or at least very highly humid. Have you ever had a windshield fog up? The windshield gets fogged over and you can't really see. The way that we clear the windshield is we actually remove the humidity. So we're conditioning the air by removing the humidity. It's not only for comfort. If your windows fog up and you can't see, that's a safety issue. So sometimes, we think of HVAC only as, I don't want to be uncomfortable, so I need HVAC. So if you have a race car, you're like, it doesn't need AC, it doesn't need heat, it doesn't need anything. It's just a race car. Well, if you're trying to race in the rain and your windshield fogs up, you really can't see. That's costing you lap time. So it's more to it than just comfort. And then again, cleaning of air, dust, pollen, odors. Now look at this, controlling the source. Let's just pause right here on source. Controlling the source of the air. That's what I was saying. Fresh air, recirculated air. If you want maximum AC and you've already got the air in the cabin cool, recirculating and cooling the already cooled air is going to get you the coldest possible temperature. And then the output, so that's all input, that's where the air is coming from. It's fresh or it's recirculated. And the output, that's the direction and the location where it's blowing. You got a foggy windshield, you want the air blown across the windshield. A little bit more than that, you want probably a fairly large volume of air. So when we talk about the velocity, now we're getting into a slightly different system. That all has to do with the blower motor, the blower fan, you may say. We can control the speed of the blower fan, the direction, and we can output it up on the windshield. But if you want to clear the windshield, we need to control the humidity and have it be dry. We can dry it in two ways. The most common, when it's raining, it's usually kind of cold. So the most common is we'll run the heat. Basically, we'll get a hot heater core. We'll run air through the hot heater core, and that will dry the air because it's hot. Kind of like burns off the moisture, burns off the humidity. But, and this is a big but, We could also remove the humidity using the air conditioning system by cooling the evaporator core. We cool the evaporator core. It's kind of like when you take a shower. It's kind of rare, like once a month or so. Am I right? When you take a shower, you get out and you look at the glass, and all of a sudden the glass has like water beads all over it, and the beads are running down. Like, why is all the water there? Well, I'll tell you, that glass is kind of cold. When you get in, everything's the same temperature. When you're running a hot shower, the actual air kind of warms up, but that glass stays kind of cold. So all that water goes onto the mirror and it condensates. It's actually condensation, and it a lot of times even run off. We'll do the same thing. We'll cool the evaporator core. We'll send air through it. The moisture, the humidity, moisture will hit that metal, condensate, and run off. Give me some evidence that that happens. You ever notice anything when the car's running, pulling up to Costco, waiting for the gas pumps because it's 50 cents cheaper than everywhere else? It's just a big line. People are sitting there blasting the AC. What do you see under the car? You look under there, you're like this. What do you see under there?
It's dribbling.
It dribble, drippy, drippy, drippy. That's literally the moisture hitting that cold evaporator, condensating, running off the bottom of it, going into the HVAC box and dripping out the drain. It's exactly what that is. And that's normal because, again, we're removing the humidity from there. Give you an even simpler example. You got a nice cold beverage of unspecified type. Let's say one soda. If one soda, you put the soda down and it's hot, what happens to the one soda on the outside of it? What happens to that can? It's all wet, am I right? If it's hot and that can is cold, that will collect a bunch of moisture on it, right? So we can remove moisture in several ways. Point being, if you want to be able to remove moisture without having heat, you need the AC working. So it's actually important that the air conditioning functions for safety as well. Okay, so continuing, it's changed quite a bit. So back in the day, this is kind of crazy, but back in the day for heating, we used exhaust gases. Now that doesn't mean that we were shoving the tailpipe back in the window and dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. But like, let's say it was an old Volkswagen Beetle, it was an air-cooled engine. They'd put actual ducting around, and they would try to pull heat off the engine. We'd actually even run the exhaust pipe forward so that we would get heat off the exhaust. Now, any of you scooter boys riding your motor scooters, when it gets cold, your hands are cold. You can always reach down and kind of put them in the area of the engine. The engine's still warm. It is actually a pretty legitimate source of heat. There's better ways to do it. But then we would even also use electric heating elements, for example, just to warm the steering wheel, and that would be it. You just get a warm steering wheel. But now we have a fully enclosed cab. So right here, that's what it's called, the cab. This is when the car's closed in, it's relatively airtight. We can actually warm that space. They were even using stones that were like, you'd actually put, have a fire or a fireplace, and you put stones or bricks in there, burn the fire all night. Then when you went to leave, you could grab those with a pair of the tongs, and you could actually put them in a part in the car, and that would continue to heat. You wouldn't have an open flame, but those warm stones would put off some heat. I mean, you're talking some old school stuff. You could even use heating oil lamps. We knew how to stay warm and not be in style. It was pretty embarrassing. Then look, early 30s basic air conditioning system provided cooled air, but not in the way you think, right? So we had all these heating systems. Then people were like, oh, you know what? Heat's fine, but it's really hard to cool air. It's true. I mean, if you think about it, we've been having campfires for a couple thousand years, several thousand years, maybe 6,000. So if we've been using campfires or fires for heat, that's not that complex. You light something on fire, you got your heat. How do you cool something? It's like, what the heck? Well, they figured out something kind of interesting. When water evaporates, it actually absorbs heat. If it absorbs heat into the water, that means heat is removed from the air. So the air is therefore cooled. So they were actually using basically swamp coolers. Swamp cooler would be kind of like the slang term for an evaporative cooler, and that's what we were putting on these cars. They're kind of interesting. So evap coolers could look like this. You see right here, air would come into this. There would actually be water running across some sort of substrate, like a picture almost like cardboard box, but you'd have water running down it, and the water would recirculate and recirculate, recirculate. But when the air came through, it would go across that cardboard, and that would cool the air. And then this would actually pipe the air in, and you'd be getting cooler, relatively cooler air. It wasn't going to be air conditioned air. It could say potentially, if it was working really well and it was in a dry, like a desertish environment, kind of like here, it could drop it potentially 15 degrees. 15 degrees is nice. But if it's 90 out and you drop it 15, you're getting 75. And you know what? That's fine. But if it's 90 out and you're running full-fledged air conditioning, yeah, that's going to blow like 40 something. All right. So this was not even similar to air conditioning, but it was better than nothing. Kind of makes sense. This is going way back. If you go to car shows and people are really into these types of old cars, like a 50 something, 40 something, maybe even 30s, you might see something like this. Pretty neat. Okay. And then we start getting a little more, start getting a little more high tech as things go. So like, if you look at this one, the first known vehicle with mechanical air conditioning was a 1930 Cadillac. And it was installed in the trunk with a separate gasoline engine. It was almost like a little generator in the back. If you wanted to start it, you had to put gasoline in it. And if you wanted the AC, you'd have to pull over, get out, go to the trunk, pull start it. And then that would actually make air conditioning. Pretty wild. Kind of cool though. It was called the Kelvinator. Kelvin. Old scientist, temperature stuff, physics. We're covering that in a couple days. And then this one even shows a 39 Packard, and that had air conditioning as like an optional add-on unit. That actually looked more like this. So this was getting quite a bit closer to what we really have. You didn't have a gas engine in the back. It actually had a compressor that would be belt driven, and they may run it, a couple different ways, but you'd basically have a compressor, maybe driven by the engine, maybe driven by electric motor, and that would circulate the refrigerant to the back. And in the back, you'd have an evaporator and expansion valve and, a blower motor and everything. But to make it really work, we'd have to run AC lines through the cabin or underneath, and then actually go to a condenser. So this became like the split unit. It was a condenser outside, evaporator inside. But for these to work, we got to recirculate refrigerant through there. So we need a compressor. So in 39, you could actually get something that was, kind of resembles what we have now, almost 80 years later, 100 years later. And so that was kind of fun back in 39. Wasn't there. And then in 54, Nash, which is long gone, and Pontiac, see, that's what's kind of crazy to me. Nash to me was like an old car that was extinct, and Pontiac to me is just hits different. Pontiac's been gone like for 20 years. I just can't live with this. Because I love those cars. Who doesn't love a Trans Am? If you don't love a Trans Am, something wrong with you. But they had front mounted HVAC, kind of like what we were talking about there. And then in 57, Chrysler switched from R22, which is old school refrigerant, to R12. Pause. Any of these R numbers are going to be a type of refrigerant. It stands for refrigerant 22. I don't really know why it's 22. Maybe 21 wasn't good enough, and then 22 was good. I really don't know the numbers. I'm not sure that there's any significance there. But R22 was used on homes pretty recently. R12 right here, that R12 number, that's going to become like evil. Evil. R12 is, ooh, R12, evil, bad. But then in 63, we actually got a Corvette, and that had air conditioning in it. It was the first sports car to be equipped with air conditioning. Here's that Nash system. So if you look, you can see it's kind of similar. We got a compressor right here. The compressor is, in this case, specifically driven by the gas engine. So see, before that compressor may have been driven by like electric motor, maybe even a separate gas engine. This compressor here in 54 is actually driven by the regular engine by a belt. And that's what we still do now. So it's kind of fun. Hey, yeah, I'll catch you. I'll come see you before I go. So when we have that belt-driven system, we got to be able to turn it on and off. The one that was the in the trunk separate gas engine, we could turn it on and off. To turn it on, you had to get your butt out and you had to start the sucker. To turn it off, you had to get your butt out and push the kill switch. But on this system, they did something interesting. First off, you don't want the air conditioning running all the time. You don't want that compressor pumping 24/7. It's going to wear the compressor out. It's going to also give you better, worse gas mileage. It's going to ruin your gas mileage. You're going to be pumping and pumping and pumping. If you don't want to run the AC, we actually want to turn that off. Well, here's how we do it. Electric disconnect clutch. So we have a magnetic clutch. If we send 12 volts in ground to that electric disconnect clutch, boom, it kind of clicks and you can hear it. And the compressor actually starts pumping. If we don't send 12 volts in ground, the 12 volts doesn't go there, the magnetic action doesn't happen, the belt still turns, but the guts of the compressor do not turn. Now that's very important to understand because we still do that on a lot of cars. So they may call it a cycling clutch, magnetic clutch, something similar to that. You want AC, you press a button, the button is going to send 12 volts and it's going to activate that compressor clutch. Boom, 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 and then it's pumping. And then we still have this condenser outside. We still have this evaporator inside. We'll talk about all the why those are what they are tomorrow. All right, and then we have a lot of these HVAC systems were in the engine bay, but it's at least front mounted. It's not in the back. The back's kind of weird, but it's front mounted, so it's getting more and more close to what we have now. We're going to be able to pull fresh air in the intake. We have a blower that we can ramp up. We can blow air through this evaporator, this heater core, and it'll end up inside the car. It's kind of neat. And then you notice the difference between the Nash and the Pontiac, they're actually really similar, right? They're cool. They're quite similar. Front mounted, electric belt driven clutch. Cool. Maybe exactly how we get the air back in there might be slightly different. You notice this is really like HVAC. These are vents. Like this is like some you see up in someone's attic when you're looking at an AC or a furnace. You see these ducts, right? So ducks look like that. Duct, not duck, like quack quack, not like the Mighty Ducks, like DUCT, ducts. So if you need duct tape, how do you spell that? Anybody know? Is it duct tape or duct tape? Trick question. Duct tape is the type of tape. Duck is a brand that sells tape. So I'm not sure. It could be either one. Which one you asking for? I don't know. Make sense? It's not supposed to. And then there's your Corvette. I'm sorry, but look at the back end on that unit. First car with AC. Okay, here you go. And then we continued to rework, redevelop, come up with new things. The air mix system is kind of cool, very similar to what we do right now. Came out in 67. Air is passed over an evaporator. Cool. to cool and dehumidify the air. Okay, cool. Then a heater core to heat the air. What? Combining these two in a system where the driver could select more precisely desired temperature. Whoa. So we didn't have a heater system and an air conditioner system. We had one that was combined. You want cold air? Run it over the evaporator. You want warm air? Run it over the heater core. You want somewhere in between? Run it over both a little bit, right? So you didn't have hot or cold. You could actually mix the air. It's almost like you probably could call it like a mixer, like an air mix. But what do you mix in the air? An air mix. Yeah, an air mix. Let's call it. Oh, they did the air mix system. That's why it's the air mix system. Cool. So that concept has stuck. We still do that, at least on cars with an ICE with an engine. All right. Then in '87. Now I don't remember this year, but at least I was around. The Montreal Protocol began the task of phasing out R12. Well, here's what that's about. The Montreal Protocol was basically like back in those days, the big talk was the ozone layer. There's a hole in the ozone layer. You know, it's the ozone layer, the ozone layer, the ozone layer. The popular cartoon was Captain Planet. That was just the thing. Fern Gully. That was what was in at the time. So they basically all these political leaders came together in Montreal, and this is something we'll cover, but they were like really going after what is damaging the ozone layer, and they found a major reason or major contributor to that was R12. All right, so in the past, up till '87, R12 was no problem. R12 you will know as Freon. Now, technically, Freon was like DuPont, the company DuPont made R12, but they called it Freon. Makes sense? So it's not technically to say that you can't buy R12 that's not Freon, because Freon was a brand name of R12, but everybody called it Freon. Right? They began phasing that out. You know what that means? No more. So in 94% of the vehicles produced were equipped with air conditioning. Whoa, think about that. In 1990, 94% of the vehicles produced had air conditioning. So there's refrigerant in 94% of the vehicles. That's just the point being, almost all the vehicles have it. So here's the problem. If it's got R12 in almost all the cars and they have a leak, they get an accident, they need service, and someone just pops a line off, that refrigerant's being released into the atmosphere. And remember, this R12 was a contributor to the ozone layer, right? So a big push here isn't going to be, oh, we found a better refrigerant. We found a refrigerant that works better. We found a refrigerant that's cheaper. That's not the push, okay? Push right here, Montreal Protocol. That's politicians going after R12 because the ozone layer, okay? So the Clean Air Act was passed into law. So in 87, they were making plans. 90, they're like, hey, let's pass this into law. And then it was law. Then quite a bit later, 2010, European Union, which is not really my concern, mandated any refrigerant with a global warming potential of more than 150 no longer be used, right? So we were pretty chilling in 87 and 90. And then they're like, oh, you know what? 2010, that's not good enough anymore. And then the US followed. 2015 made the use of R134A unacceptable as a refrigerant in vehicles past 2021. Now, I didn't explain all the different refrigerants, but what I'll tell you right now, R12, Freon, was phased out and replaced with R134A, and R134A was like amazing. It was so good. It was like you could practically breathe it. You wouldn't really want to, but like R134A was supposed to be amazing. And then 2010, 2015, depending on what continent you're on, all of a sudden they're like, no, it's no good. It's no good anymore. We got to get something new and better. And remember, new and better doesn't mean it cools better or it's cheaper. It means better for the environment. See what I'm saying? So they put the spurs to them and said, after 2021 model year, no more R134A. The heck? So we'll go through, we got a few slides on the timelines, but that's to give you a little bit of the history. Now, and the reason we cover that's coming up right now. So if you want to work on refrigerant system, what's it say? Servicing HVAC systems involves refrigerants, refrigerant oil, solvents, and engine coolants. Always refer to vehicle manufacturer service manual for the latest service procedures. I'm going to add that a little bit. The government's very concerned about what we're doing with these chemicals, especially the refrigerant. Coolant too, I mean, coolant's bad. If you were to dump coolant in the ground, I don't remember the number, but I think potentially 1 gallon of coolant can contaminate like 1 acre or something. It's huge. But with refrigerant, at this temperature and pressure, like, sea level, that refrigerant's a vapor. You let it out, it doesn't puddle up in the ground. It goes up in the atmosphere. And that's what's damaging the ozone layer. So some of this is for safety, but really more of it's for pollution prevention, if you'll recall that. And then, of course, we need to know what we're working with. Safety data sheets, PPE. Everyone make sure that you bring your PPE to school. PPE being safety glasses. I'll give you the gloves, but when you're working with refrigerant, definitely gonna have to watch those ojos. Gloves are a good idea. We did have a couple semesters ago a student who thought that they had the refrigerant disconnected or something went weird, and they ended up having a hose pop off with refrigerant in it, and the refrigerant coming out and rapidly lowering in pressure was freezing, and it actually froze quite a bit of his skin on his hand, and he got a little bit of frostbite right there, at least frost nip. Kind of freaked him out. It's gonna be pretty cold, so there's definitely gonna be some safety things. To be honest, SDS, my recommendation would be just Google SDS for R134A or whatever we're working with. Cool. That's what I would do. And so again, it's talking about long sleeves, shirts, pants, etc. Because look right here, can cause instant freezing and frostbite. Right? If it were to occur to the eye, it would blind the eye. It's true, just is what it is. So good safety glasses, goggles wouldn't be a bad idea. You could wear these Google goggles, be looking really good, really good. And then we'll discuss a little bit on the safety precautions. So if we're working with a refrigerant, it's important that we have pretty good ventilation. Definitely going to be taking quite a bit of care if we're working with an open flame, because let me break this down for you. Heat can create a problem. Okay, heat can create a problem. Yeah, it was R12, not good enough. R134A, supposed to be amazing, but no longer good enough. Later refrigerant R1234YF, flammable. Okay. Would you feel nervous if you were working on an AC system with propane in it? Because that happens sometimes. The propane's actually good refrigerant. We don't use it because it's flammable. Make sense? So's R1234YF. I don't think it's very flammable. I think it'd be pretty difficult to actually get it to light on fire. But the point being, heat can cause a problem. Heat can create a problem, aka a thermal event. Make sense? And mainly for emissions, but also a little bit for safety. We need to control how we store the refrigerant, how we monitor it, right? So like most refrigerants are colorless and odorless. You don't even necessarily know that they are there. Refrigerants are considered non-toxic in the vapor state, but it doesn't mean it's something you really want to breathe a lot in. And gaseous refrigerant in high concentrations can be hazardous and will result in asphyxiation. You know what that means? Your You got to understand your lungs for a second. You breathe in air. That was nice. You breathe in air. The oxygen in that air gets absorbed by little nerves or whatever, something in your lungs. I think it's um, gets into your red blood cells. I forget what it is, but it absorbs the oxygen into your blood. You need that. You breathing isn't what's really keeping you alive. It's the oxygen that you're breathing. So if you have a big refrigerant discharge, the refrigerant can actually displace the oxygen. You'll be breathing, but there'll be no oxygen in there. You won't absorb any oxygen in your blood. That's why it can be an issue. And then again, refrigerants may collect down near the ground and under a vehicle, at least some of it. So if you're discharging refrigerant, or you let's say that it's not even on purpose. Let's say you're working on an engine and all of a sudden you break a hose. If that refrigerant's coming out, it's not going to kill you right away. But what I notice a lot of times is like it'll give me a headache. And I mostly attribute that to like I'm trying to breathe, but I'm not getting enough oxygen. It gives me a headache. So I think so. We're going to just be conscious of that. Make sure it's well vented. Cool. Um, and then again, they're considered non-combustible, but you mix it with air under a certain specific circumstance, could be flammable. Okay. You want to work on the system? No problem. But we got to recover the refrigerant. When we work on the system, it's going to be empty. There's not going to be refrigerant in there. Cool. So that's one of the things you guys are going to get the license to do that. And then you're going to get some experience on the machines. And that's all coming up like in the next week and change. Okay. Then some interesting things. Never expose refrigerant components to heat above 180. So we don't heat them. Even above 125 could cause the storage container to explode. They don't vent. See, so like if you heat it up, it can't vent. The pressure is just going to increase. You'd probably never do this, but if you did need to warm the container, like let's say that you're trying to charge the vehicle and you can't get the refrigerant, let's say your bottle's running low. When your refrigerant container runs low, it's difficult to charge the car because your container pressure is kind of low and it's hard to push that into the car. You could actually warm the tank. If you warm the tank, you're going to increase the pressure, right? Because kind of like a tire. If you warm a tire up, the PSI goes up. Well, if you warm a tank, the PSI in the tank goes up. It's easier to get the pressure, get the refrigerant into the vehicle, out of the tank, and push it into the vehicle. You can use a tank warmer. I didn't say you could use a torch. You can use a tank warmer. That's what it's designed to do. You could even potentially use warm water. And then if you're trying to clean, let's say, radiator condenser fins, you can use cold water or approved compressed air nozzles to clean those out. It shouldn't be, hot, acidic, or extremely high pressure. And then we do have approved storage containers. We can recover and store refrigerant in those, but they're only filled around 60%. We can't basically completely fill them because we need a little bit of room in there for the liquid refrigerant to be at the bottom and the gaseous refrigerant to be at the top. And that gas refrigerant, that's going to kind of give us a little bit of a buffer for expansion if it does get slightly warmer. So mainly it's to make sure that it's a vapor. It's also for safety too. And then approved containers is what we should be using. Well, I see a blue tank right over there on the back of the machine. This is the thing. Never reuse empty disposable containers. So on your R134A machines and on your YF machines, there's a container there. But that container that you see externally is it's like a disposable. all your machines have a high quality tank inside. If you want to recover and recharge refrigerant, you need to buy a tank. The little cheesy disposables are junk. They also have a check valve. You can't actually recover into those anyway, so you know. And then we could be using wearing some correct gloves. Barrier gloves should be good. If we depressurize the system, it's less of an issue. Observe all the warnings. There's going to be lots of warnings on TIS. Another note, if we're working on it and we undo a line and there's an O-ring, that O-ring should not be reused. We should be replacing that O-ring. Refrigerant oil is hydroscopic. Interesting. That's the same as brake fluid. So it absorbs moisture. So if you got refrigerant oil that you need to pump in the car, you want to do it from a sealed container. If you used oil, or you use oil that was left with the cap off it sitting on the bench for who knows how long, you're actually introducing moisture to the system that's not good. Makes sense? So it's similar to brake fluid in that way, right? And then summary pretty much you got. So we're going to jump to strategy-based diagnostics here. Give me just 1 second. Strategy-based diagnostics is actually not real specific to AC, but this is your first very heavy diagnosis class with me. Some of it's procedures, some of it's going to be actually diagnosis. So we'll get started. And I'm pretty firm on my beliefs. So if I talk to you about diagnosis, I'm very confident I'm right. There's a lot of people who can replace stuff, who can repair, who can change a part to repair a car. There's not so many who are able to really troubleshoot and diagnose. So when we say strategy-based diagnosis, this is like a way of life. This is a whole way of thinking. It's a way to think about problems. It's a way to fix cars. It's a way to figure out what's wrong with, equipment, houses, everything. So the more you take this to heart, the better it's going to be. The only thing that I wouldn't really try to get involved in, if you can help it, is really diagnosing people, because it's a nightmare. I'm going to tell you, sometimes people don't want to be fixed, right? But as far as fixing things, this is useful to more than just cars. So I'll give you I can give you 1,000 examples, honestly, but I'll give you one that's kind of quick. Who likes refrigerators? Is anybody into refrigerators? Nice stainless steel, French door, Samsung, Nobody's into that, huh? You don't care. You only care what's in the fridge. Am I right? No. Anybody have any idea what a new French door Samsung stainless fridge costs? Somebody shoot a guess out there. You make
like $3,000.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the ballpark. Yeah, $3,000 would not be. They can be more. They can be a little less, but you're in the ballpark. Is anybody really wanting to spend $3,000 on a fridge? I mean, I could tell you, I didn't want to spend no $3,000, but you get a little older, you get in a relationship, you're really trying to support each other. She wants a nice fridge. We're gonna get a nice fridge. If I can get a nice fridge for a deal, and it's not a piece of crap, I'm down. So I went to look at this Samsung French door, brand new, still had the plastic on it, but somebody's selling them. They're kind of sketchy. And I'm like, why is this French door brand new, still in the plastic, $800? Either A, it's stolen. B, it fell out the truck and it's scratch and dent. Or C, there's something wrong with it. So I looked, people were kind of sketchy. It seemed like it could have been stolen, but kind of checked out. I didn't think it was really stolen. I looked, it's in perfect condition, so it's not a scratch and dent. So why is it so cheap? I don't know. I'll figure it out. Worst case, I'll fix it. See, I'm not really scared to buy something messed up because I'll be able to fix it. I'll find a way to fix it because I know that I can troubleshoot. That's my point. So I bought this thing, $800. Brought it home, plugged it in, stuff seemed fine. I put the milk in there. The milk goes bad like 2 days. I'm like, what the heck is up? Doesn't make any sense. Maybe something wrong with the milk. But then I start thinking about it and like this milk never really seems that cold. So if you look at the front panel of the fridge, it says 35 or 34 degrees on the fridge. And the freezer I've got set to 0. The freezer's rocking cold. The fridge says, I'm going to say 34. I think it was 34. The fridge says 34. The milk doesn't really feel 34. So I actually go ahead and I get my thermometer that I have in my toolbox for diagnosing cars. I put it inside the fridge. I put it in there. I leave it in there for like 20 minutes. I open it up. You know what the thermometer says? The screen says 34. What's the actual thermometer say? Take a guess. Like 54. See, 54 is still cool. It's fairly cold, but like if you want to have milk last a week or two, it ain't going to do it with 54. 54 is not cold enough. Now, how the heck could the fridge be reading 34, but the actual temperature be 54? I want you to think about that for a second. Think about that, because this is exactly how AC system works, that are automatic AC systems. So you could think about all these issues. And if you're thinking it's low on refrigerant, well, cool idea, but that's a bad guess. If it's low on refrigerant, the actual screen wouldn't be measuring 34, right? If you had a problem with the compressor, you know, dust in the condenser, some issue, it wouldn't cool enough, and that's fine. But the panel would say 54 or 62 or something, right? This panel is saying 34, and I'm measuring 54. So that panel's incorrect. What do you think tells that panel what number to display? Anybody got an idea? What tells that panel what to display? A temp sensor. Yeah, I see the chat. Exactly. So temp sensor. But what this temp sensor was called a thermistor. And actually, generally speaking, all temperature sensors are thermistors. And the reason they're thermistors is in nature, right? The world has laws. The whole universe has laws. It just does. So gravity is a law. Gravity just, they can calculate it, there's specific numbers. Ohm's law, right? Kirchhoff's law. All these laws about physics, Pascal's law about hydraulics, right? There's these laws. We know the universe is orderly. It makes sense. It's predictable. You can study it and you can predict exactly what's going to happen. It's a very lawful universe. So there's a couple things that are funny though. If you have a material and you're talking about its ability to conduct, like let's say it's a copper wire, you're going to have a specified amount of resistance per foot. If you heat it up, the resistance goes up, right? The more hot it is, the more resistance it has, you get less current flow. It's the way electricity works. Cool. Now, thermistors are backwards. And that's why we use them for temperature sensors. They have an inverse relationship. The hotter you get a thermistor, the lower the temperature is. The hotter you get a thermistor, the lower the resistance is. It's like, what? When you get stuff hot, the resistance goes up. But on a thermistor, when you get it hot, the resistance goes down. But it's very linear. It's a very clean, smooth line. So as you know, let's say you use that for a temperature sensor, as the air cools down, the resistance goes up. We can essentially use that as a resistor, you know, measure its resistance, but in reality, we're probably going to use a voltage divider circuit, which I'll cover later. You're going to watch for voltage drop. But to simplify, as the air cools, the resistance goes up. Therefore, it can display a number. So if you have, let's say, 10,000 ohms, maybe that's 60 degrees. If it cools down to 50 degrees, you might have 12,000 ohms. If it's 40 degrees, you might have 14,000 ohms. If it's 30 degrees, you may have 16,000 ohms. Make sense? So the resistance changes with temperature. Cool. That's how temperature sensors work. Thermistors work that way. Have I ever worked on a refrigerator? No. Matter of fact, I've never bought my own refrigerator until I bought this thing. And it's a beaut. And I bought it 12 years ago. And the milk was going sour when I got it. And I thought about it. I didn't have a service manual. It doesn't have like a good troubleshooting guide. You can't plug your scan tool into it. You can't check codes. You can't look at live data. You could just come up with a strategy based on the symptom. I thought about it. I thought, if that temperature sensor is reading incorrect, it's skewed, right? The actual temperature is 54, but it's reading 34. I should be able to test that temperature sensor. Now, what I did find was an actual spec sheet saying at this temperature, it should read this many ohms. At this temperature, it should read that many ohms, right? So I did measure it, and the resistance indicated 34, but the actual temperature was like 54. So I diagnosed that this thermistor is not reading the correct range. That's called a skewed sensor. So I tracked the sensor down. It was, get this, under $20. I put the new temperature sensor in, and I'm still using that fridge now. And I think I bought it in 2012 when I first moved to California. So it's 12 years old. Still looking pretty good. It had moved from one house to the next, put a little ding in it. It's a sad day, but it works great. The point being, if you can really troubleshoot, you could fix a lot of stuff. You could understand a lot of things. You can figure out a lot of problems. It's not just for cars. It could be for all sorts of different systems and stuff. Now that you've heard that story and you kind of have an idea of how I went through that, and how I verified it was, well, I fixed it and then I put the thermometer in there and I opened it up and the thermometer read 34 and the temperature screen read 34 and they both read 34, so it's fixed. How I really verified it was I slopped a bunch of milk in there. I waited a week and then I drank it and I'm like, ooh, this milk isn't chunky. This is working great, right? So that's how I verified it. Now let's go over what strategy-based diagnostic process is and also how we document. So if you look at it, first thing we're going to do, first you're going to listen strategy-based diagnostics. That means you develop a strategy in your mind. To come up with a strategy, you have to understand the system, right? So I didn't totally understand the intricate details of the refrigerator, but I understood enough to know, well, the temperature screen is an indication of what the sensor's reading. And so if it's inaccurate, you have to at least understand the system. First off, if you don't understand the system at all, you can't do strategy-based diagnostics. It doesn't work. So that's the purpose of, over several days, we're going to go over the AC system, how the AC system works, what the refrigerant's doing, what it's doing, what each component does. What would happen if each component was not working, individually, et cetera. So you first have to know the system. But in the meantime, I want you to remember, you're going to ultimately take all that knowledge and put it into strategy-based diagnostics. So first things first, we gather initial information. So that may be, what's the customer's concern? My customer concern, my milk is chunky and it hasn't even been a week and it sucks, right? It sucks when you go to pour milk on your tricks and you see blobs coming out, it looks like yogurt. That's my customer concern. Also, when does it happen? How often does it happen? With AC especially, we want to know, like, is it on a long trip? Is it when it's hot, when it's cold, when it's light, when it's dark? When is it really happening? So I'm gonna use several stories to help you understand this. First one is going to be, say, a C concept actually. So we'll walk through it with this. Customer states on a long trips with the family, the AC stops working, but only then. So the initial information was your AC blows cold unless you're on a long trip. Yeah, that's right. Okay, cool. Verifying the customer concern. How are you going to verify that? You're going to road test the sucker. Exactly. Nate was just about to say it. So you can road test it. Now, If I jump out there and road test it, if I just go out to the parking lot and I fire it up and I say the AC works, I shut it off and I'm done, I say, well, no problem found. I didn't find a problem. I want you to remember something. You work in some nice dealerships. None of your dealerships are nice enough to convince a customer to spend their day there. They go to the waiting room, they get a donut, they get a little beverage or something, they get forced to watch Jerry Springer. After an hour, nobody wants to be there at all. So if they're in the shop with their car, there's probably something wrong. Now, it may be normal, it may be unrelated or something. I'm not going to say that what they're saying or perceiving may be true, but like there's a reason they're in there. So don't very lightly say, not my problem. Don't very lightly say no problem found. Like you should really try to give this your best effort. Sometimes it comes back to asking more questions, right? So if I jump out there, I crank up the AC works, I got nothing. I'm going back to the service advisor and say, hey, this repair order says AC blows warm. I felt it, it's blowing cold. Can you ask the customer if there's, any more information? And the service advisor may go to them and say, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. Remember, it only happens when it's on a long trip. And then they come back and tell me that, well, what do I really need to do to verify it? I might have to take it on a long trip. What that means, well, if it were me, I would probably say, hey, I'm not going to spend an hour driving this car around, but I will drive it home. All right. You want me to verify it? I'll drive the car home. I'm covered under the insurance policy. I'm not going to do anything stupid. All I'm going to do is really try to verify this. Right. So that's a way to verify it. You're going to have to duplicate the conditions that the customer says. But before you can do that, you got to have the initial information gathered. Right. Then you're going to go ahead, verify it. If you can't verify it, we're done. It's not that we want to tell them no problem found. It's that you don't really have any way to fix this. You have to really know what you're working with if you want to fix it. Make sense? Just a tiny little bit of an exception is you can search for TSBs, and if you find a campaign recall a technical service bulletin or something that describes the condition perfectly, you could potentially maybe proceed with that repair, even though you didn't verify it. But generally speaking, if you can't verify it, we're done. Now, in Toyota land, remember, we're worried about lemon law. We're worried about cars being bought back. It's possible that a car has some issues, but it's also possible that it doesn't. And if like, let's say this one that we were talking about, if you can't verify it, we won't try to attempt to fix it. I had one just like that. It was a guy with a Silverado, and first thing I noticed was I sit in the seat and it feels like I'm in a crater. And I look over and there's like a seat belt going to a seat belt. It's a seat belt extender. And like, you can just tell, you just sitting here like, this is a big dude. And the concern is AC doesn't blow cold. I blast the AC, it blows cold. I can do better though, right? It feels cold to me. Probably AC is going to be colder than most of your hoopty piece of crap cars. And all of your hoopty piece of crap cars have better AC than my bike, which has nothing. Okay. So I'm coming to you from a humble place, but that's not good enough. I want to put a temperature gauge, a thermometer in the vents. I want to blast it full. And I want to record the number. I want to record the ambient temperature outside, the humidity, and the actual temperature at the vents. That's what I want to do. And I did that. And I said, there's really nothing wrong with this. And I let the car go. And guess what came back like a week later? Same thing. I knew because when I got in, I felt like I was sitting in a crater and I saw the seatbelt going to the seatbelt extender. And I was like, okay, I'm sure that there's nothing wrong with this because I already tested it, but let me go find out. Now, this is what the service advisor told me. Service advisor was like, well, can you just like do a recharge? And I'm like, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. No, let me tell you how bad this could have gone. If I were to do an evacuation, recover oil and recharge it, that's considered a repair attempt if it's under warranty. So I kind of told the service advisor, like, well, I have no problem doing that, but it's passing the test. So I'm not able to verify the concern. Can we talk to the customer? And the customer came out and he looked exactly the way I thought he would look. And he was sweating bullets in the waiting room. I mean, he was just like, oh, yeah. But he was the only one sweating. See where I'm going with this? So we said, hey, what's up with this AC? It seems like it's fine to me. And he said, well, yeah, it's just not blowing cold. I said, I got right here on my notes, it's blowing 46 degrees today. Well, yeah, but it's just not cold enough. I said, uh, no, this is normal. This is absolutely normal. But he was not taking no for an answer. And he had just bought it too. It was like a month old. And then I said, well, tell me why you think it's not cold enough. And this was his answer. Well, I had a Dodge before and it blew colder. And so now I want you to think about that. Is that true? Is it false? Doesn't matter. It's not relevant. You can't hold one car to another car's standard, right? So just because the customer doesn't like it doesn't mean it's broken. He's not happy with the AC temperature. So this is what I had to do to deal with this one. I had to go to another Silverado, put the temperature gauge in there, blast the AC, time it, let's say 2 minutes, boom, check it out, 46 degrees. Now move it right over to yours, boom, 46 degrees. Brand new truck on the lot, known good, same temperature. That's what I had to do to deal with this customer. Now, what if I were to do the evacuation, do the whole service, do the AC service? That would get submitted under warranty, right? That's a repair attempt. If I were to do that and I were to give it back to the customer and it blew 46, what was going to happen anyway? Think about it. That customer is going to come back. And now I'm going to say, well, there's nothing wrong with it. He's going to say, yeah, there is. It doesn't blow cold like my Dodge. And I'm going to say, well, this is normal. I can't fix it. It's the same as this one. It's the same as that one. It's the same. I would do everything I would have done. But see, I would have set us up for failure for lemon law because me attempting to fix something directly implies there's something wrong with it. Period. If that goes to arbitration with actual, a judge, lawyers, they're going to say, well, clearly there's something wrong with this car. You tried to fix it and you couldn't fix it, right? That sounds like a lemon. So the worst mistake you can make is not verify it. Make sense? So at first, I was kind of almost thinking about doing what the service advisor said. And see, service advisors don't get hauled into court. Service advisors are not the technical experts. They sell service. Sometimes they sell shoes, and sometimes they sell houses, and sometimes they sell car stuff. They're just salesmen. Make sense? That's what they are. If you attempt to repair a vehicle or you can't repair a vehicle, you would be the technical expert. See what I'm saying? So you don't take the service advisor's advice just because they're older and maybe they make more money and maybe they don't, but we don't really listen to them. We're trying to get to the bottom of it. So let's just say you're able to verify it, right? Then we can research the possible cause. So that big boy, big Silverado, couldn't verify that one. The other one where the customer says I need to take it on a long trip for it to happen, why drive it home? Guess what happens? It starts blowing warm as I get closer to home. So I verified it. Cool. Now I need to diagnose it. So I need to do some research. Sometimes the research is checking for TSBs, doing a task case. Sometimes it's even asking a more senior tech, asking around the shop a little bit. I'd probably not do that one if I could help it because people will steer you wrong sometimes. But you have resources. Some of you are pretty smart. But I'm going to tell you, when you're in the dealer, you have amazing resources at your disposal. Take advantage of those, right? FTS, perhaps. Even just MDT, shop foreman, mentor techs, like some of that stuff is really good. When you're on your own, you lose a lot of those resources. It becomes a lot harder to fix cars, just so you know, it does. So if you can research it in those traditional ways, perfect. Sometimes researching it just means thinking about it. So when I was thinking about this vehicle, I was thinking, why would it get warm on a long drive? But then this is what was interesting. I shut it off and I went back out to it like a half hour later and it was blowing cold again. What the heck? So we actually ended up having a talk with the customer. And the customer, this is where the story, I'm going to fib on this story a little bit, okay? Just letting you know. 90% of the time, my stories are 100% true, okay? So talked to the customer and they said, oh yeah, we went on a vacation, big old station wagon. We had mom, dad, two older kids, some younger kids, the dog and the cat and the baby's way in the back, like the whole family in this sucker. Station wagon was basically like a mini minivan, except cooler, but definitely not cooler. Kind of cooler, tough to say. So they go on this big old vacation, and there they are, and AC's cold, and then all of a sudden AC's blowing warm. And so they stop at a repair shop, Billy Bob's Bait, Tackle, and Auto Repair. Billy Bob rolls out. He says, what you need? You need some bait, some tackle? You need some worms? Need some hooks? What you need? Oh, you need your car work done? Yeah, I do that too. Mostly I sell night crawlers, fishing line, but I'll fix your car too. I use the same tools. There's some pliers. Right, so he comes out and he says, well, I don't know. Gonna be a little bit. By the time he gets out there, the AC's blowing warm. He says, yep, you're good to go. So they leave Billy Bob's, keep on going. Sure enough, half hour later, an hour later, blowing warm again. Huh, kind of interesting. But every time they keep taking it into the shops, by the time they go to check it, it blows cold. So nobody can really figure this thing out. So by the time I got it, that's why the story is a little bit of a fib. Okay, they went to Billy Bob's, okay. I think about it like this. Let's just say, in my mind, I'm thinking all the things I could do it. Let's just say either something's got to be happening with the pressures, or maybe something's like freezing. I kind of think of these ideas. You could check for codes. You can at least get a little bit of an idea, but then ultimately you have to have a plan. So my plan on this one is just symptom based to check the pressures. And once you get into checking the pressures, because I'm thinking it's a pressure related issue, you're performing tests, right? You notice it doesn't say start replacing parts. It says perform tests. You don't want to perform tests that don't need to be performed though. So when it happened, I paid attention. The blower motor was still working. Although I have to admit, when it was blowing warm, the blower motor sounded funny. And when I put my hands on the vents, I felt less air. So it's kind of interesting. But then when it sat for a half hour, it came right back, right? So like, I'm gonna perform some tests. I go ahead and I put my gauges on there and I read and actually my pressures are in spec. So I don't think it's like a compressor or condenser type of thing. But I'm kind of interested on the air, how the air felt. So I think about it, I drive it again, I drive it back to work, and when I get there, the AC's blowing warm, and I immediately start looking and going around the blower motor area, and I notice not a lot of air is coming out. And so I send a camera down in there to try to inspect why is the airflow not coming out? Because I looked at the cabin filter, the cabin air filter looked clean. I sent a camera down there. You know what I found on the evaporator core? Ice. It was totally icing over. So it's icing over and that's reducing the airflow. Why was it going away after it was parked? What happens to ice when you park it? You shut it off. It's warm, melts. So this was an interesting case where the actual evaporator was freezing over. So I had to do quite a bit of research. Then I had to do some tests. And literally how I did my test was I was just feeling if air came out and then I sent the camera down and found it. Now, why was it freezing over? Well, I might have to do a little bit more research to find out the root cause. And this one, well, it was slightly undercharged, which was making the low side pressure too low. but it was very slightly. So remember, I put gauges on it and I didn't really see an issue. But once I saw it iced over, I realized it's gotta be too low. If the refrigerant pressure is slightly too low, it's gonna actually freeze over. Other thing is there's supposed to be a temperature sensor that's probed into the evaporator. And the purpose of that temperature sensor is to monitor, if you get under 32, that's when water freezes. So we want to run our evaporator maybe around 33, sometimes 32, but we don't want to always have it much below 32 because then that moisture and humidity will get on the evaporator and it'll freeze over. So does it kind of sound like it could be that temperature sensor? Well, look, guess what I found with the camera? I found the temperature sensor was pulled out, wasn't probed into the evaporator core, it was just laying on the side. So it was never measuring the ice over. See, if it were to be measuring 30 degrees, 28 degrees, it would actually turn the compressor off and let that evaporator thaw a bit, right? So this one was quite a bit of layers to diagnose it. What do you think the root cause was? The root cause is what causes the whole thing. So was the freezing really the root cause? No. The real root cause was that the temperature probe was supposed to be in the fins and it was laying off to the side. Similar things could happen if it was undercharged too. So you got to really find the root cause. Then then you'll carry out the repairs, right? So if I carry out the repairs, which is disassemble that and get the sensor probe back into the evaporator, how would I verify the repair? How do I verify the repair? Well, if I had to drive it home to verify it was broken, I should probably drive it home again to verify it's no longer broken, right? So sometimes the verification, you might have to spend a little bit of time. Cool. So that's one example of all these steps. Those are all the steps we want you to be able to cover. We're going to go a little bit further on each of those, right? If we're trying to figure out a problem, some of the other things to consider would be like service history. What has been done to the car? Maybe on that car with the temperature sensor pulled out, they had just done some work under the dash. Maybe they had just done an evaporator or something. It could give you a clue to what you may find. It can give you a clue to, maybe what is causing the customer's concern. And you can find that in a lot of your programs that you're running at work, CDK, Reynolds, Techion, whatever it is. A lot of times you can look into the service history. Sometimes you can look in service history through Dealer Daily or like TIS type thing, where you're going to be able to see what's been done at other dealers, not just your dealer. So you can find some information. For independents, sometimes you can actually see it on Carfax, but a lot of times it's very limited. But it helps be able to see that. Sometimes the service history is on the physical repair order up here, like recent services can be up here. Again, when we're doing these steps, we're making notes, so we're ready to write up good cause, right? The concern's easy. Customer concerns X, Y, and Z, verified concern. By doing this, the cause is where we write our diagnosis notes. Check this, measured that, performed this test, right? So that's all in documentation form. So we can see quite a bit of things with service info too. And yeah, I think you got that. Additionally, we could be checking for TSBs. So again, this is one of those resources. If you have a customer concern, it's a good idea to always check for TSB actually. Because if you don't, and it ends up being related to that TSB, it makes you look dumb. It's hard to get paid. You won't get paid diagnosis time if a TSB applies, at least under warranty. So you know. Because you're supposed to check for TSBs. You're not supposed to diagnose. Once they know there's an issue, they don't want to pay technicians everywhere to diagnose the same thing over and over and over. Saying like, look, we know we screwed up. We're not going to pay to diagnose it. We just want you to do this TSB or this campaign. Kind of makes sense. So there's some good ideas. Again, when was it first serviced? When was it last service? What was the most major service? Was the vehicle ever serviced for the same problem more than once? So let's say that a customer had an engine replaced and now they come back in with AC blows warm. There's a chance somebody recovered the AC, replaced the engine, hooked it back up, and forgot to charge it. There's also a chance that they hooked it back up with the same O-rings and maybe ripped an O-ring, right? So knowing that the engine was out is really going to help you be guided on how you're going to diagnose it, in which way, and what direction you're going in your diagnosis. Can make sense? Especially if it's been something that's been repaired or attempted to be repaired repeatedly or more than once, could be a big issue. So look at the service history. You know, you can see if like maybe they're not doing some maintenance or etc. And then this is one that's a little bit lame, but I got to tell you, it's going to help you fix cars. Just being able to communicate is very important. This is mostly on the service advisor, but it's not real uncommon when you have a problem car to have the service advisor, you know, get out of the way and you talk directly to the customer. At times does happen. So you got to be able to know what to ask. So I had a service advisor, nice guy, pretty good guy, really. But he never really knew exactly what to ask. In fact, that was almost all of them. Very few of them really know what to ask. But I know people were trying to work with him because the customer would say, "Oh, I have, you know, this concern," and he would be like, "When does it happen? How often does it happen? When the last times it happened?" You know, those are good questions to ask. But like if the customer has a check engine light, you don't say, "Well, when did it happen? How often does it happen?" The check engine light's on. You might find out when it came on, but how often isn't really a good question. So you got to know what questions to ask. Relevant things like, is it happening a certain time of day, especially with air conditioning? Is it happening like we had one at one point that the car would blow kind of warm AC during the day, but then at night it would blow really cold. And it was automatic temperature control, ATC, we may call it. Automatic temperature control is using sensors and then adjusting the motor specifically to cool the air more, cool the air less. So it's kind of like, well, that's weird. And then if you're not asking the right questions, you're not paying attention to the details, you could miss it. With a little bit of probing, like, so let me understand this. You're happy with your air conditioning at night, but during the day it's not cold enough. They said, well, actually, it's too cold at night and it's not cold enough during the day. It's kind of interesting. Any sort of other patterns you recognize? Not really. It all has to do with what time of day it is. I said, well, what about on a really hot day? Yeah, it's not cold enough. What about on a kind of cooler day? It's still not cold enough. It's kind of interesting. Um, just getting those details helped. Later, what the diagnosis turned into is just thinking about what it could be caused by, checking for DTCs, and then thinking, why would daylight versus night change that much? Because it doesn't seem to be tied really to temperature as much as literally sun. And the issue on that one ended up being um, the automatic temperature control would reference the amount of ambient light. So like a sunlight sensor on the dash. During the day, think about it for yourself. Like if it's really sunny outside and you walk outside, it feels hot. But if it's cloudy outside and you walk outside, even if it's the same temperature, it doesn't feel that hot. Would you agree? So with these automatic temperature control systems, they need to know how much sunlight is coming through the vehicle, right? If you have a lot of sunlight, it's going to turn the AC lower than what you set on the dash. On the automatic temperature control, they set it at 67 and they forget it. And they don't turn it down and turn it up and turn it down like you do in your hoopties. They just set it to 67. This is a higher end, like a Lexus. And it was actually a Cadillac, to be quite honest with you, but we'll call it a Lexus. So it's kind of interesting to say, it doesn't have to do with temperature, it also has to do with sunlight. Well, wait a minute. They've got a sunlight sensor. You can go on live data, you can inspect the sunlight sensor. One of the ways you inspect is you actually shine a light into the sunlight sensor and look at all data. It shows the number, the voltage. Then you go to shine the flashlight into the sensor. True story. What do you think I found? You will never guess this. I will give you one guess. Somebody can unmute and guess. I'll tell you how wrong you are.
A snake.
Beanie Babies. Beanie Baby. You never thought I was. Do you even know what Beanie Babies are? You know what a Beanie Baby is? They had Beanie Babies on the dashboard covering up the sensor. Think about that. You got Beanie Babies on the dash. It looks like it's dark all the time. The AC is going to warm up a little bit when it's dark. Make sense? So their AC wasn't working that well when it was dark. It was basically reporting dark all the time because of Beanie Babies. It was all about the Beanie Babies. It had nothing to do with refrigerant and the compressor and the belt and codes and Beanie Babies on the dashboard. Okay, so like going through some of that kind of crazy symptoms, stuff like that, but listening specifically to when it occurs, when it doesn't occur, really helped me to drill down and diagnose that one. Now, obviously, you need to check for Beanie Babies from now on, okay? So that's kind of what it's saying. And sometimes, too, the customers are a little sketchy. Sometimes they have issues. You know, some people are damaged goods, some of us too. But a lot of times you can get an idea how honest a customer's being by sort of like their body language type thing. Some customers are trying to pull scams. A lot of them are not. Some customers know that there's something wrong because, you know, they already had somebody else look at it or something. You can tell a lot. So we won't beat the horse on exactly how you're going to ask questions, but understanding strategy-based diagnosis means making a plan to approach a diagnostic situation. So overall, this strategy should work for all diagnoses: cars, AC, engine, transmission, brake problem, motorcycles, refrigerators. You just keep going on. Whatever, hot water heater, whatever you're working on, the strategy-based diagnostic system should really help you get to the problem. We're focusing on fixing the problems correctly the first time. That's what we're trying to do. You're in service, okay? There's a lot to gain in service. Some of you could have what it takes to be really good at providing service. Service jobs can really pay. Service jobs can save people a lot of headaches, right? If somebody's having a hard time fixing a washing machine and they have to call the same person out again and again and again and again, they're frustrated. That's a waste of time. If somebody's better at diagnosing and repairing the first time, they can make more money. They can get more work. They can charge more money. There's a very good business potential if you can actually diagnose and repair stuff. It's pretty sad, but it's pretty common. All these people I work with, because I'm always trying to do these jobs and construction and building stuff and whatever, they always try to get me to come work for them. I always tell them there's not enough time in the day for me to teach full time, run everything I got to run at home, and also be a plumber with you. I can't come be a plumber with you. I can't come be an electrician with you. I can't come do stucco with you. You know what I'm saying? So like, if you can really train your brain to be able to diagnose and repair issues, you can provide excellent service. Especially if you're detail oriented, there's a lot of potential out there. Just letting you know, a lot. All right, cool. And then it's a scientific process. So we're trying to make it not guesswork. We're not just like, oh, the AC blows warm. That means you need a recharge. You don't know that. You haven't tested anything. You can't prove to me that it needs a recharge. That may be a correct guess, because to be quite honest with you, probably 8 out of 10 AC concerns of blowing warm is because it's low on refrigerant. It's low on refrigerant, maybe because it has a leak, but you don't know that. See, so we're not trying to be better guessers. We're trying to make it more scientific, more of an exact science than a guesswork art. Okay, scientific process. And then it begins with identifying the customer concern and ends with confirming that the problem's been resolved. If you can get your mind and your discipline to be able to take a customer concern and be able to all on your own, without help, without favors, without guesswork, without guess number 2 and 3 and going to parts and shotgunning stuff, if you can do that, hear a concern and turn that into here's your concern resolved and here's your bill, you're going to do well. For real. Okay, that's what we're trying to go for. All right, and then it's twofold purpose of problem solving. We're providing a consistent roadmap for technicians as they address customer concerns and ensuring the customer concerns are resolved with certainty. So if you're following this, it should give you both. Now, sometimes you're following charts and troubleshooting trees and stuff in the service manual, and other times you're kind of on your own. You got to know the system. You got to understand the system. You can have some ideas. You can do some tests, but you shouldn't be replacing parts unless you know they're bad. And the tests you do should make sense, right? So that's like reasonable. Would you say that's reasonable? Reasonable means that you can reason with it. So if somebody comes to me and they say, oh, I need to, let's say, recover your refrigerant because I want to weigh how much is in there. And that way I know if it was low or not. I could say, well, I could reason with that. That kind of makes sense. But why do you want to do that? And they'd say, well, your symptom is AC is blowing cool but not cold. If your refrigerant level is low, that would cause this exact thing. Okay, cool, proceed. But if they were to say, oh, I want to recover your refrigerant, I would say, well, why? Well, that's just what we do. It should make sense. That doesn't make sense to me. Makes sense. That's just what we do. Doesn't make sense. Or because your blower motor's not working. My blower motor's not working. So you want to recover the refrigerant? See what I'm saying? It should be reasonable. It should make sense. And then again, proper diagnosis is important for several reasons, but the purpose of state and federal laws, those are to protect consumers buying new vehicles. So they pass laws so that when you buy a new vehicle, you get a good quality product. You don't buy a new vehicle and then have it in the shop and they guess again and they guess wrong and then you're without the car for weeks on end. Those laws are in place to force those cars to be bought back, including interest rates, rental car, everything. They'll pay off the loan. I mean, Toyota especially has a lot of money to lose if a car is bought back. And it's kind of sad because a lot of the cars that are bought back, I'm very confident could have been fixed if they were fixed the right time, fixed right the first time, and they were not fixed right the first time because they were not diagnosed right. Diagnosis is a big thing, right? And then again, many state laws hold the manufacturer responsible. So if the car doesn't get fixed, if the car has 3 strikes, if the car is down for a while, they'll very easily side with the consumer and force buyback. All right, but truth be told, it can be challenging to find the source of every customer concern. Even veteran technicians have a difficulty, struggling sometimes, especially if it's a new technology. Applying strategy-based diagnostic process helps resolve challenging customer concerns efficiently. And if they don't, if they don't do a good job or they misdiagnose it, and that's going to happen, you're all going to misdiagnose. Okay, so I'm not telling you to be perfect. I'm telling you, I want you to continue to improve. Kaizen, if you will. Continuous improvement. But customer comebacks can lead to impressions, right? People may think the work wasn't performed. The shop's incompetent. The shop was trying to scam the customer. All these are reputations of automotive technicians and mechanics, if you will. And that may be true. Some of them really are scammers. Some of them really are incompetent. And sometimes they really don't perform the work. But other times, like, it's just a tough diagnosis. And you think you got it, but you didn't got it. You know what I'm saying? Like, but the customers a lot of times don't want to really acknowledge how complex our jobs are sometimes. So it's important that we get good at them quickly and try to diagnose correctly the first time. All right, so here's the steps. And again, they could come back to be caused by misinterpreted or misunderstood concern, failure to verify the original concern was resolved. So let's do verify customer's concern, research possible faults and gather info, focus testing, perform the repair, verify the repair. That's what we're looking to do, right? And this one, again, summarize those steps. First step is to verify the concern. Ensure the vehicle's not operating as designed. So remember that one I told you about. That Silverado was working exactly as designed. And luckily I didn't fall for that trick. But when I was brand new, I would have, right? So fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So you're going to get messed up, but you got to learn from that. If it's operating as designed, we don't proceed. Make sense? And then also, we need to really verify it because we're going to guarantee the customer's concern is addressed. If you didn't verify it first, you really have no way to verify it's fixed. See what I'm saying? So it's just more assurance that we fixed it correctly. And also, we want to get a complete understanding of the concern before we really begin the diagnosis, right? It's going to help us to do the diagnosis if we really understand it. And then, of course, document anything that you do in detail. So talking with the customer, researching service info, we can, for example, make sure that the concern doesn't fall outside of the range of normal operations. So sometimes it's normal compared to a known good. Those are good ones. And then don't jump to any conclusions. Really try to be thorough. Sometimes it comes off to the customers as like, we don't believe them. So we want to reassure them. It's not that we don't believe you, but I need to verify this to do my job. I need to verify this to really be thorough. I believe you that the car is messed up, or I believe you that you are experiencing something. I need to do what I need to do to make sure. Okay, so like, additionally, you can do some basic tests. Let's say like to verify the customer's AC blows warm. Yeah, you're going to do an AC performance test. That's something we're going to do in a few days. If it's intermittent, we may have to drive it a certain way, do a certain thing to try to get the fault to come out, to basically reveal itself. To duplicate the fault, sometimes you have to know exactly what the customer is doing when it happens. It can be a pain. Look for symptoms, data, DTCs. A lot of times faults in the AC system can set DTCs, but sometimes they can't. Intermittent diagnosis, if we're really getting into it in detail, we might even need an oscilloscope. We can have DTCs and freeze frame. You can actually save the freeze frame information as a file on TechStream, right? And then again, don't rush to go in and clear the DTC. You clear the DTC, you cleared any clues you had. Freeze frame is your clue, assuming it did set a code and record the freeze frame. Cool. And then we're going to start by gathering info, right? So let's say we verified this. We're going to go ahead and we're going to gather information. Research possible faults. I'll be straight up with you. If it's something that I don't work on commonly, there are times where I'll Google it. Google's an amazing search engine. If you can, know how to sniff out the BS, sometimes there's some good answers on Google for free. Quick search, boom, like, oh, I had this problem, and this is what I did, and this is what I checked, and this is what I checked. You guys got to understand something. When I started, Google was a thing, but there was no, like, you went on YouTube and it was like basically people hitting jumps on their bikes. Like, it was entertaining, but it was not useful. Now you guys have access to this. It's not something I'm supposed to really cover by the books, but for real, if it's a problem and you go through your natural, chain of command with checking DTCs, checking bullet TSBs, maybe even talking with your foreman, team leader, FTS, et cetera. Sometimes it even makes sense just to Google the stupid thing. 80% of the stuff you find are going to be dummies because, to be honest, most people aren't really any good at troubleshooting. They're not really even any good at R&R parts, but they're definitely not good at troubleshooting. So, you're going to have to sift through a lot of stuff. Somebody says, oh, my AC's not blowing. Cool. Oh, well, start by checking your fuses and start by testing your battery and, change your cabin air filter. Like, I wouldn't go for those things, right? But if you find somebody who finds the exact issue and you can see their test replicated, there's some pretty smart people out there. And so you might unofficially consider some of that, but it's going to be like a diamond, it's going to be like a needle in a haystack finding good info. So in a lot of ways, it's more efficient to stick with the traditional type things. But just doing possible, potentially what could cause it, it's a good idea. Like, for example, if it's engine issues, let's say that the engine won't start. The engine needs air, fuel, ignition, compression, maybe it's security issues. We're going to have to sort of have a list of some of these faults. So if it were AC, the AC blows warm, that could be something with refrigerant. That could be potentially some with the compressor affecting pressures. That could even be the blower motor's not working right. That could be some with the temperature door. We could make a list of potentials, right? Then what we need to do, we need to narrow that down. So when you do diagnosis, you never want to have all the possibilities in your mind. You want to start with the overall possibilities, then you want to eliminate. So if it's AC blowing warm, would you agree the refrigerant could be low? We can check that with pressure. So I put the gauges on, the refrigerant pressure is good, boom, that's it. I'm not worried about refrigerant low. We run the car, I can verify the running pressures with the gauges. If the running pressures are good, I'm no longer worried about refrigerant. I'm not worried about compressor, stuff like that. If, let's say, the blower motor is not working, I can eliminate all that refrigerant pressure and all that type of stuff and just narrow down to the blower motor because the blower motor is not coming on. The customer may not say my blower motor doesn't work. The customer may say my AC blows warm. But you got to get in and kind of start eliminating some things. If the blower motor is not running, we're more worried about the blower motor. We don't really want to look at refrigerant pressures and whatnot. Kind of makes sense? And so just narrowing it down would be process of elimination. You're going to eliminate until you can't eliminate something. If you can't eliminate something, you're confirming that. Kind of makes sense? That's what we do. Okay, and then gathering information could be, again, like all those things we talk about. Code, system description, and operation. So if it's a new type of refrigerant system that you've not worked on, you're probably not going to go back to the textbook like we're in right now. You're probably going to go to like a system operation diagram that would be part of service info. It might be under new car features or similar, right? There could be wiring diagrams, diagnostic steps, repair procedures, etc. But again, we should really be working mostly off service info. I just saying by the book, yes, but like sometimes I find some really good information on Google, YouTube type thing, Tutubal, right? TSBs, for example, this TSB, it's going to save you a lot of time. Next semester, I'm going to tell you about how TSBs are made because I happen to know, because I happen to be involved in one. Just one though. All right, and then focus testing. This is where you're performing pinpoint tests, specific tests. So if the issue was the blower motor, we're not going to pinpoint test refrigerant pressure. We're going to pinpoint test, is the blower motor getting voltage? Is it getting ground? Is it getting both of these? Is it getting it here? Right? Measuring voltage would be a type of focus test, pinpoint test. Checking pressure would be a focus test. Maybe even just visually observing to see if the condenser fan is running would be a focus test. You should not be in the back looking at the tail lights to do focus testing on the AC system. See what I'm saying? They should be specific tests, and you should be doing tests that are going to eliminate as many potential faults as possible. So one thing I noticed with you guys on your diagnosis last semester, some of you did pretty good, but you tend to try to take the easy path. So if the AC doesn't work and the blower motor doesn't work, you'll go like to the fuse because you know it's likely that I could have pulled a fuse because it's easy to pull a fuse. You checking the fuse only checks the fuse. If you were to go measure voltage at the blower motor, you'd be checking all of the wiring in one step, right? So that would be a better diagnosis. You could do better. Do the steps that are going to eliminate, what's this say right here? As many potential faults as possible with each test. As many potential faults as possible, right? And then intended to eliminate possible causes of certainty. So not like, well, I don't think it's the fuse because, like, or well, I think it's getting voltage because, like, go measure it, prove it out. That's the thing that we say. And then you should be able to record that on in your notes so you can write it up in your story, your technician story. Continuing focus testing. A lot of times if it's a test that we perform, just a quick little write-up. A lot of times that should include what you wanted, what you expected, and what you actually got. If it's electrical, what terminals you tested, what the voltage was. If it's pressures, how many PSI, etc. And then if you're able to isolate it to a specific system, circuit, or something like that, that's the point. That's good. You note that. Cool. And here's some example of the focus testing. Here's some more example of focus testing. We're checking for voltage right there. There's 11.9. That would be like good. Checked 11.9 at such and such volts. Okay, etc. Right? And sometimes you're following the service manual step by step. And otherwise, and other times you're kind of following it, but you're also kind of going based on your understanding of the system. You need an in-depth understanding of the system to be able to do this. Cool. And then performing the repair. Look, that's not really rocket science. If you diagnose it correctly, doing the repair is a lot of times not difficult. Sometimes it can be, but you're just replacing, repairing. That's it. That's a procedure. The diagnostic takes a massive amount of information and understanding. Doing the work is almost like it's a routine a lot of times. Remove a compressor. Okay. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. Now, the common person can't do that, and you're going to need some time doing that, and we're going to spend the time. Procedures, I've taught you a lot of procedures. I'm going to teach you more procedures, but diagnosis is much more difficult, takes much more understanding. It's makes you worth much more money. Okay, that's what I'm telling you. Okay, good. So a lot of times you can even follow the procedures. Pretty easy. They'll call right out. And then when we're doing the work, using the right tools, using the right procedures, using the right techniques is very important. And then this one's a little tricky. Taking the time to do the job well, you're right. You have to do the job well. It has to be to good standard, but you want to do it as quickly as possible to be profitable. Right? That doesn't mean putting only every other bolt in and shipping it. It's like doing a good job, but doing it as quickly as possible is the win. Okay. And then of course, you can't do the repair unless the customer approves it. I just got a call from a guy last week with a skid steer, a Bobcat skid steer with a big mower on the front of it. I don't even work on those. The problem is right now, a lot of my friends are trying to get their weed abatement done. That means they got to bring a big machine in and mow fields and stuff like that. And one of the main guys who does it, his machine is down. He has a Bobcat skid steer with the mower. He took it into Bobcat dealer. Bobcat dealer said, oh yeah, it's this control module. They replaced it. It didn't fix it. That control module was $800. So he said, well, I'm not gonna pay the bill. I mean, you told me that was gonna fix it, and it didn't fix it. And they said, well, we had to start with that. Well, now what? Well, now it needs a harness. The harness is $3,000. And he said, look, no, no, I mean, it sounds like you're just guessing, like it doesn't make sense. So he authorized the first repair, and then when that didn't fix it, he didn't authorize the second repair. And then he called me and said, hey, can you check this out? And I was kind of like, I I'll look at it, but it's very hard for me to get the information. Tell me what's up. And I verified it. It takes about 15 minutes, and the thing sets codes and shuts down the mower. Lost communication with the auxiliary hydraulic control. So I told him, honestly, what we need to do on this is get to that control module, make sure it has 12 volts, make sure it has ground, check to see if it has communication, and monitor that until the fault occurs. And then we'll really know. But the problem is it's going to take me quite a bit of diagnosis. It's going to be a pain in my butt. I'm going to have to run this thing around while keeping my meter and stuff on there. And he was sort of like, well, I don't know. See, so he didn't really want to pay the diagnosis time. So no problem. But if you don't pay the diagnosis time, you get a guess. See, so that's sort of where I would recommend you guys get is be able to diagnose stuff. People will pay. He might not be ready to pay in my case. He can take it back to the dealer and they can guess another few things, and then probably he'll be ready to pay. But even at the dealership, they're not really doing good diagnosis. And he was pretty upset about it, saying, well, I don't understand why they told me it needed that. I said, well, I don't know. It doesn't sound like they really diagnosed it. It just sounds like they guessed what it could be, and they're just going to keep guessing until it's correct. So he was pretty upset. Cool. And then sometimes we need programs and etc. Sometimes it's, there's a software update and whatnot. Just make sure you don't overlook some of those. And then sometimes there's TSBs. And then also when you're doing this work, details, doing a good quality job, making sure you're not leaving stuff messed up, or even just as simple as fingerprints. All right. So then the last step after repair and all those proper repair procedures is verifying it. Basically, whatever you did to duplicate it, you need to do again to verify it. And if you verify it and it's good, then you're good to go. If you can't verify it, I would say continue to drive it or whatever you need to do until you can verify it. I would really not recommend letting that vehicle go unless you know it's fixed. If you let it go and it's not fixed, that's going to really make the situation worse, if not make you potentially liable in court for a lemon law buyback. Okay, that's kind of a big deal. All right, so you could verify it mostly by driving or duplicating it or etc. It's kind of the deal. Three C's I think guys are pretty solid on, but just as a reminder, 3C's being concern, cause, correction. Toyota version being CCR, concern, cause, remedy, or repair. Right. So 3C's is all about really driving the diagnostic process. Customer concern is this. Cause, that's your story for what caused it and the repair, and then how you verified the repair. Right? That's the 3C's lines up just perfectly with diagnostic process. Cool. So fairly predictable. And then documenting, well, I gave you guys quite a few notes on your 3C write-ups from last semester. So you can, we'll do iron sharpens iron. I'll try to sharpen your stories up a little bit, get you a little bit more and more ready. Cool. And that's pretty much what this one's all about. So how you guys feel on the diagnostic process? Pretty decent? Think you're about ready for.
I feel like I struggle with the story a little more.
Yeah, that everybody struggles at first. That's why we're going to keep working on it. So a little less about AC, a little bit about AC, just the history of AC. Really, AC is going to be coming up. The actual air conditioning system will be tomorrow.